is a collection, anthology of stories written in honor of Richard Matheson. But long before that, he wrote the introduction to California Sorcery, which was the first thing I had ever seen that was any kind of serious group scholarship. And I said, wow, this is, I knew much of what he talked about sort of in passing, but I never really thought about it, in any kind of cohesive way before. So I said, oh, look at this incredible phenomenon. So partly inspired by that, I've been working on group-related stuff for many, many years. Among my credits is the author of Richard Matheson on Screen, which is a book that tried to cover, even if only in passing, since some of them don't exist anymore, every TV show, called an episode, or movie that Matheson wrote or was based on his work. What I've been doing in recent years, and I should have my head examined, is expanding that approach to 12 other members of the group. And it's called The Group. 60 years of California Sorcery on Screen, 1951 to 2011.
And who were the members of the group?
Well, it's funny that you should ask. One of the distinctive features about the group, other than that it doesn't have any formal, they were also called, Robert Kirsch, LA Times critic, called them the Southern California School of Writers, because that's their academic name. Robert Bloch, also a member, called them the Matheson Mafia, which I like, and the California Sorcerers, of course, and they were sometimes known as the Green Hand, which has an extra application, or whatever you're going to call it, because 4 members of the group, Matheson, Jerry Soule, Theodore Sturgeon, and George Clayton Johnson, in the 60s put together a corporation called the Green Hand, with which they tried to create and sell to various TV producers new ideas for TV series, none of which ever went anywhere.
There have been many such organizations
by
writers who get together and think, we should do it ourselves, and then they find out that they can't.
Yeah, and Richard said that several of the members, not to be named here, didn't actually do a lot of writing, and he said they would get together and smoke pot, and he didn't smoke pot. He said he probably got high on the fumes, and there were some sort of financial shenanigans not to do with the group members, of course. So the whole thing fell apart and they were out of it. But so the Green Hand, both an informal name for the group, their own formal, and the name of the corporation that no longer exists. So another distinguishing feature: there's no formal group membership. They didn't have an identity card.
Did they have a place that they usually met?
I know they hung out a
They
lot
clicked
at
at Charles Beaumont.
for Bradbury, right?
Yeah, for Bradbury.
I'm sure they hung out a lot at Matheson's house, at Beaumont's house. They actually tended to go off a lot together on various jaunts to other places. They'd go out at night and go to ride the bumper cars that they used in the park, or they would zoom off to England. Some of them were interested in race cars, so they zoom off to England and go, or to Europe to the Grand Prix or something. And then one day, I think it was Beaumont came in and he said, "Hey, you guys want to meet Ian Fleming?" And they're like, "Yeah." So they went, it was Chicago, I think, or maybe, where I forget. They all went and met Ian Fleming, so they were always dashing off to do something somewhere, or they would just get together and talk and critique each other's work, or critique each other. No, I don't think they had like a headquarters or a back cave or anything like that. But there was, much of this was just friendship and writerly collaboration as much as anything more formal. William Nolan called himself, Beaumont, Charles Beaumont, Robert Bloch, Ray Bradbury, and Matheson the Creative Center. So I'm not going to contradict him on that. But others who were basically members or not, depending on how you look at it, Charles E. Fritsch, Harlan Ellison, late in the game, George Clayton Johnson, Chad Oliver, O.C. Rich, Ray Russell, Jerry Soule, Theodore Sturgeon, and John Tomerman. They all wrote for many of the same magazines. Many of them were published in Playboy, which at the time was a haven for high-class fiction.
And Ray Russell was the...
Well, yes, that was one of the interesting aspects, that in addition to being a writer himself and a screenwriter, and worked with William Castle, as did some of these people, he was Playboy's fiction editor.
Yeah.
So he was in the handy position of being able to acquire stories, many by Beaumont and Matheson, for the magazine.
I remember when Duel came out in Playboy, and it was such a big deal.
Well, that's true. I don't know that Russell was still working there at that time, because that was years later. But for sure, I mean, I know stories like No Such Thing as a Vampire, and I think the distributor, for example, Russell did acquire for him Playboy, and so they had that relationship as well.
And he had intelligence for the group members too, about who was buying and where they could
Yes,
shop around
yes.
stories and things like that, which they all found useful.
Yeah, Paul, among other things, by the way, he and I together co-edited the Richard Matheson Companion.
Paul, what a great scholar of Matheson.
Yes, big scholar and collector. And with his collector hat on, he has acquired over the years several different archives of correspondence from various places, much of which sheds considerable light on these sorts of relationships.
And much of which you'll hear about tomorrow morning.
If you come to town,
So I do have one here if you want me to do it. This is an excerpt from a letter that Matheson wrote to a friend of his named George Haas regarding the group, and I thought it might be useful for this session. April 20th, 1954. We went over to Charlie Beaumont's house last week to see a story of his and his friends that was being done on 4-Star Playhouse.
Oh, Masquerade.
Yeah?
Masquerade, yes.
All right.
Then
There you go. He and Jan Oliver kept flitting in and out of the room to alternate on a novelette that they were trying to rush through in time to sell it to Star Science Fiction, the one I'm in. Also present were Charles Fritsch, Joe Slotkin, and of course the ever-popular Forey J. Ackerman and Mrs.
yeah, that interestingly,
was
that
an informal member of it too, right?
you know, there's no formal definition. I never considered him one.
Yeah.
He was, for some time, the literary agent for some of the members, but that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think they showed up in that capacity.
Yeah, yeah. But, I don't think it lasted terribly long. But,
You also didn't mention Rod Serling, who would attend occasionally, but didn't fit in as well as the other members, because he kind of had a different background. He was used to being the center of attention when he was in the room, and didn't, had a hard time adjusting to a group of people that didn't necessarily need to regard him as that.
yeah, I mean, I never considered him a member. I said, some do, you can't. You're a nickel, you decide. But I think one of the things to bear in mind is that all of the group members were, published authors first.
Right.
Many of them, most of them did become screenwriters later on, but, Sterling, of course, was not, he didn't have a literary background. So he may have had,
Was Ray Bradbury a member or not?
did I not reel him off? Yes, I'm sorry. He's deaf. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, he was a mentor
I would think
for
he was.
many of the younger group members, certainly for Beaumont, for Nolan, and for George Clinton Johnson. So that's absolutely correct. Yeah, I don't think Ray Bradbury spent as much time hanging out with them as the others did, but he was certainly very much a mentor in many of them. So, but what fascinating, this is so funny because it kind of echoes what Steve was saying earlier about starting to notice Matheson's name on things and saying, wow, look, he wrote this and this, isn't that amazing? And I certainly did that in my day as well. What struck me more in somewhat later years, when I did have some sense of who some of these people were, was to start noticing not just that, but in Matheson's case, all of the incredible people that he worked with.
Yeah.
And to say, wow, he did The Twilight Zone, he did Star Trek, he did Edgar Allan Poe movies, he did this, he did that, and say, connect the dots and say, this guy was at the center of everything. And that really is how I started to get obsessed with Matheson, and then by extension, his friends and coworkers. I was fortunate enough, before they passed, which they all have now, to interview at great length, not only Richard, but also, now it's trust my memory,
While you're looking, I'll just tell people that Matthew's are writing for Film Facts and Bare Bones, and has interviewed a ton of people Some of them we will list here.
Yes, Robert Block, Ray Bradbury, George Clayton Johnson, William F. Nolan, and Jerry Soule, who were most of the key members of the group surviving at that time, along with Richard.
The last ones that I were Nolan and George.
Jerry Soule.
Jerry Soule.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it, did it have, I
I was Soule.
Okay. When I published my interview, I called it Soule. Maybe I was wrong, I was Soule man. Jerry has several distinctions in addition to his talent. He wrote 3 episodes of The Twilight Zone that at the time were credited to Charles Beaumont. Charles Beaumont had a very sad story in that he died very young, and not only young, but prematurely aged by what I believe is now commonly believed to have been premature Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Although there's not, I don't think there's even a consensus on exactly what killed him. But
Wasn't even out of his 30s, he was like 37.
that's right, that's when he died, and even in his last year.
Or something, and it's weird, he, much like Walter Jameson, he just seemed to age prematurely. He physically aged. I understand he looked like he was 90.
Yes, that's correct. In his last couple of years,
That's true.
he looked like a 90-year-old man, and he couldn't think straight anymore.
And he would go in and he would pitch, but I understand he would pitch a story, and he would sell it, and then he would walk out and he'd have no memory of what he pitched.
Well, I'm not sure that ever happened. It may very well have, but that's kind of the other reason why he collaborated with, sometimes uncredited, many of the members of the group on various scripts and things, because before he started to get so sick, he was not only a very talented writer, but he was an incredible, he was great at pitching himself. So he would go in and have these meetings with network executives and stuff, and he'd be blue sky and this and that, like him pitching that, and he pitched so much work that was accepted, he couldn't handle it all.
Right.
So it's like, it cost me to write all this stuff, like only one man. So he would get people like O.C. Rich and Sean Tomlin and stuff to either collaborate and be credited, or sometimes collaborate and not be credited, but just he would share the money with them too. And they were not resentful of that fact. They said, look, this is a great training ground for us. We get some money too, so why not? So some of their earlier stuff was written with him. However, later on, more because he was so sick and couldn't function as well, he did have Jerry Soule write these 3 Twilight Zone episodes, which now are acknowledged to be his, but at the time they were not.
Talking Tina.
That right, the Living Doll, the new exhibit, which is the one about the killer waxworks, sort of like the Robert Block waxworks, right? And what was the third? Paul? No, Gilbert, you know? Okay, all right. Well, some third one I forget what it was.
But certainly the
Oh, I remember Jewel, the Queen of the Nile, the thing with the city of Lovesky.
and certainly the Living Doll one, the Talking Tina
Oh,
one,
yeah.
is one of the classics. That's
Yeah. So they would, he would sit with Beaumont, and they would come up with the idea for the story, but then that was about as far as it went, and then he would go off and write it, and Beaumont would get the credit.
Now, did he write those after Beaumont was sick?
Right, yes, Beaumont was deteriorating at that point.
So he couldn't write.
He could, and it was, it was so sad. He would
But he
say,
was,
he would say to his friends, I can't go to a movie anymore because I can't follow the story. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. So he came back at one time and talked to them about King Kong. He said he'd just seen it.
Yes.
Seen it on television.
Yes.
And he said he'd never seen it before.
It was his favorite movie.
It was his favorite movie, yeah.
Very much like what, everybody knows what Alzheimer's looks like these days. That's what it looked like in a 35-year-old man.
Yeah, it's unbelievably tragic.
Now, Jerry's other big claim to fame, if you want to call it that, was that he was with Richard during the incident that inspired Duel.
Right.
I'm sure one or two of you have heard of Duel. Best known as the early TV movie effort of Steven Spielberg, where Dennis Weaver is a salesman who's driving out in the desert in California and gets followed by a crazy homicidal truck driver whose face you never see. And
This was before the term road rage had been
that's
invented.
right, although they probably came up with this or something like that. Oddly enough, it started, as many of Matheson's stories did, in real life. The day that President Kennedy was assassinated, Jerry Soule and Richard Matheson were playing golf. They got halfway through the game, and they heard about Kennedy. They were like, well, I don't think we're going to finish the game here, guys. So they decided they were going to go home. So while they were driving home, I think Jerry Soule was driving, was in the car. And this, pretty much what happens in the story in the movie happened to them. This crazy truck driver came and was tailgating them at high speed in a narrow canyon where they couldn't pull over, and they thought they would be killed. And then finally, they reached some point where they could pull off and let the guy go by. And Richard said, he did this kind of stuff all the time. He said something weird would happen, and then he grabbed a piece of mail out of Jerry's glove compartment, and he said, write a short story for Playboy about a guy being pursued by a killer truck driver. And this is, 1963. The story appeared in 1971. So I later learned, while editing the assistance of Mr. Stewart, that he tried in the intervening years to get it to have it turned into a TV script or something. He approached for his TV series, and they were like, "Yeah, it's too limited. Nobody's going to want to see that." So he said, "Oh, well, okay, well, forget it. It's a short story instead of Playboy." And in fact, it was his last story. Yeah, his last story in Playboy, and for the most part, the last short story he did for that kind of ended that period of his career of writing short stories. So, but Jerry was with him on that, so he was kind of in it.
Perhaps felt he couldn't top himself.
That may be. Well,
I was wondering, did he say to Jerry, because I'm often in this situation when I'm with writers, so they say, I have dibs on this story.
Oh, no, I don't think so. But I do know that, there were many occasions when, as his daughter, who's sitting over there, can tell you, her older sister, Tina, once their apartment was so small that she was sleeping on some little army cot or something, and she fell off the bed and rolled under it all the way back to the wall. Yeah. And so they heard her crying, and Richard came in and he said, "Oh, what did you, where are you? What's going on?" He couldn't see well. They went, fell through nobody there. Oh, okay. She must have gone on the bed. I looked under the bed, found nothing there because she was so far back that at first he couldn't feel it. So it seemed as though she was going to another dimension. Sure enough, he turned that into Little Girl Lost, short story, and then the Twilight Zone episode. But he said, yes, the diabolical writer's mind. As soon as the kid stops crying, then you think of a story. So, and he said that was one of the great things about Jerry Soule was that, anybody else who was with him, when he said that, I'm going to do the story for Playboy, he was like, are you out of your mind? You've just been almost killed by this crazy guy, and you're talking about that? And he said, no, Jerry understood completely, because they had exactly the same mindset. So, yeah, that's Jerry. He was a nice guy. I think.
So many people have that sort of situation happen to them, and they might think, "My God, how did I turn that into a story?" And they never do it.
Yeah,
he did. He did. Time and time again.
Again.
He was riding on an airplane, and he thought he saw somebody skiing on the clouds or something. Or you imagine you see somebody skiing on the clouds, and that led to
that's where 20,000 feet from. Yep.
And I just loved the idea that he was able to make those connections and then make them work, It was just wonderful, right?
Yeah, I found it sort of amusing and intriguing that when he and his wife were married, they decided on their honeymoon they were going to drive across the country, like you do. I wouldn't. And so I know at least two of his stories were inspired by incidents that took place during that trip. They stopped at some sort of roadside attraction where this man had all these sort of bedraggled looking animals, forlorn, sitting in these cages. And he said, what if I saw a man inside one of these cages? And that was inspired the short story Being. Let's get to the story. Gelatinous octopodal alien movies, but that's what he came up with. And then there was another incident where they were driving someplace and stopped at some sort of roadside cafe, and he had to go to the men's room, and he was delayed for some reason, something completely innocuous, but he was gone for so long that his wife was like, "What? Hello? Where'd you go? What happened?" Which inspired Dying Room Only, which was made into the TV movie with Forrest Leachman, where there does turn out to be a sinister explanation.
So that was a great one.
Well, and Richard loved it, and he always said, he said, that's the one thing I did that I think really was better than it deserved to be.
The movie?
The TV movie, yeah. Because it was just this little, he said, it was just a little nothing story. Yeah. But it was very good.
Well, she was great. She was a great actress.
Yeah, do you remember who the husband was?
David Coleman.
It's David Coleman, right, before he was, you know.
And who else was in
Ross Martin,
Ross Martin,
and Ned Beatty,
and
and Daniel L. Carr. Yeah, all amazing stuff. Turns out that they were like kidnapping people and stealing their money and
Now,
stuff. Spirited.
one of the things that's always struck me about Matheson as opposed to like, say, Harlan Ellison, is that he didn't tend to sue people who stole his ideas. I mean, maybe that movie Breakdown with Kurt Russell, that was the same story.
Yep.
That was
Well,
the same
the funny
story.
thing is,
I mean,
there's also a truck chase in there, so it's like Dynamite and Duel merged together.
Yeah.
You know?
And then, I mean, Night of the Living Dead is just, I Am Legend, you know, a prequel to I Am Legend, sort of. And he didn't do one of those Harlan Ellison lawsuits.
Yep.
Well, and Poltergeist is
I was just coming to that. He
Yeah.
said that, you know, a lot of people pointed out the similarity between them, and he said, "Oh, you should, you know, sue them." And he said, "You know, I couldn't." First of all, it was just not his personality to do that. And second, he said, "You know, this is what MGM or whatever it was." He said they had so many lawyers and money on their side. I would have gotten clobbered. He said, "I'm not going to do that." But he did say that he thought Spielberg, who was the or an executive producer of that film, which usually now is like 17 movie, that he came back to him again periodically over the years with some other offer of work, maybe really to recompense him.
Right,
So, for
right.
example, to work on the Twilight Zone movie and to be a consultant on Amazing Stories.
Right.
So, but yeah, that he was not.
When he made that movie Real Steel,
Uh-huh.
which was really nothing like Steel, but they said it was based on Steel.
Yeah.
I think that was to make up for Poltergeist.
Or at least to avoid getting sued.
Yeah.
There was some similarity.
Very well.
I can't back this up, but my impression was always that they were like, well, you know, we better just.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Plus, you know, having Matheson's name on something is not going to hurt.
I always thought that his original take on the remake of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet would have been wonderful, which was originally it was going to have a very, very tactile part,
Yes.
and it was going to be, you know, he was going to be basically having flashbacks to his World War II flying experience, like from 12 O'Clock High,
Right.
where
Right.
and that was where the Gremlins came from. That was the knowledge they had that. I think that would have been wonderful. I think it's a shame that they didn't make that, and the way they did it was too over the top, you know.
Well, Richard was a little, you know, he said he liked John Lithgow as an actor,
Yeah.
and in fact, when Lithgow did The Doll for Amazing Stories, which actually was a script that Matheson had written for the Twilight Zone many years earlier, but it was canceled by the incoming producer, William Freud, who did not like his work. He actually came in and canceled a boatload of episodes that had been either accepted or, I forget, were planned or whatever by various group members. He did canceled at least one Beaumont, George Clayton Johnson, Richards one. So he was like the Grim Reaper came in and just knocked it out. So when they were planning Amazing Stories, Richard said, "No, that's the script to go on." They never did on the Twilight Zone. They were able to buy the rights back and did it. And John Lithgow got an Oscar for it. So obviously he's not going to sit there and disparage John Lithgow as an actor. But
And his performance was great, but it was just the way he was asked to play.
That's right.
Panicking from the very beginning.
he said one of the things he always loved about
There was no build.
That's right.
Slow build.
William Shatner's performance in the original was that, you know, that he started out, you know, so calm and then gradually became more and more unhinged by the end of the thing. He said with Lithgow, he said you started 100%, you know, where do you have to go?
Yeah, and he did a remarkable job with that. But
Right,
still,
right.
I always thought that was one of Shatner's best performances, and also The Nick of Time.
Yes.
Those two performances.
Which again, you know, it had that same kind of, you know, at first
Yeah.
it's like, wow, something funny's going on here, and then he gets, you know, progressively
Slow
more and more.
I mean, he became a much more hammy actor, I think, than he was. At first, I worked with him on Boston Legal, and he was great. He was just a great actor, really was. But he tended to go large. But he did not.
Well
do that
said.
in those days. He did not do that in those days. But he was very controlled.
Yep, very true.
A
Anyway,
lot of people going large on Boston Legal.
Well, yeah. That's what the show asked for.
Yeah,
that's right. Anyway, as far as the group goes, it is fascinating to me anyway, to see not just, they were friends, they were colleagues, they hung out together, they critiqued one another's work, et cetera, but how many interpenetrations of their careers there are. Many of them, as I said, wrote stories for Playboy. Many of them wrote scripts for Roger Corman, for William Castle. Richard never wrote a script for a William Castle movie, which I think would have been but he didn't do it. But there was a TV show called Ghost Story that William Castle produced, for which Matheson wrote the pilot. And as a matter of fact, as a result of that fact, his name is on every episode as created for television or whatever, but he had no further involvement in the show after he wrote the pilot. And they wrote, of course, for many of the same TV series, The Twilight Zone being the most obvious example. And I've always felt that The Twilight Zone is probably the single greatest outlet for their collective talents and spirit, because so many of them, Matheson, Beaumont, George Clinton Johnson, obviously Jerry Soule, wrote for the show, and that's kind of, hey, what were these guys like? Who are these group guys? Well, they're Twilight Zone. And that's probably a big reason why, as you say, Sterling sometimes is considered not funny as a member. But they also met, multiple group members wrote for Thriller, the Alfred Hitchcock Hour, Star Trek, of course, they made a huge contribution to that. The Girl from Uncle, you're a favorite, I'm sure. Night Gallery, another Sterling series. Ghost Story, also known as Circle of Fear. And
there's also the Dan Curtis TV movies, didn't they? William
yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Of course, Matheson wrote it.
Matheson did a bunch, Nolan did a bunch, and then together they did what's probably the best, other than The Night Stalker, they did the best, probably best known, which is Trilogy of Terror.
Trilogy of Terror.
You may have remember the Zuni doll chasing Karen Black. And it's funny because that's based on 3 different Matheson stories. And they had Nolan adapt 2 of them, and Richard kept that one for himself. And he said, yeah, it was kind of cruel to Bill Nolan. He said, because I knew that, because he didn't, I don't know if he did say that, but I don't remember his phraseology, but it was something like, I knew Nolan didn't care for those 2, but I said, I was going to hold on to that one myself. Or I guess it was Nolan who said, yeah, I did 2 segments that nobody remembers them, but they did the Zuni doll. So, which also was a short story in Playboy. So yeah, that's right. They both. I don't know if any of the others worked with the Curtis, but those 2 certainly did.
Right. And boy, I remember when I first saw that Trilogy of Terror thing. I mean, there's the.
You and a million other people.
I mean, I was how old was I? Like 11 or something, and that. And I think in the Night Stalker, did that come up the same year?
No, it was a couple years ago. That was 1970.
They were just so good in the back. I was just so. By then, I was a part of the Richard Matheson fan club.
Wow,
oh, Richard Matheson. And then when later on, much later, I saw Burn Witch Burn, or as the Eagle, which was the one collaboration between Matheson and Beaumont.
Well, as a feature film, yes, I was going to have to come to that. That was the only film they wrote together. They did do episodes of DA's Man, Buckskin, Markham.
Oh, they did.
Wanted, Dead or Alive, and Have Gun Will Travel.
They wrote them together.
They did. Well, yeah. See, when they started writing for television, it was, this sort of brave new world for that. And they said, geez, man, we're not really too sure what we're doing here.
No one ever is.
I mean, like us, they said, maybe we should work together and try to, have a little reinforcement. So they did probably only 1 episode each of those shows I enumerated. But, unsurprisingly, when it came to Twilight Zone, they said, I think we're okay.
Right. It's great that they have that. I mean, George Clayton Johnson was a very interesting person. I met him late in life, and obviously he didn't produce as much as them, but once again, we're very unique. We're very unique. Yes, it was unique. And true, I mean, the Kick the Can is a beautiful story. Not the one in the remake, but the original story. Right. It's
But yeah, they would, oftentimes they would sit around and sort of workshop one another's stuff. So there was a certain element of, things developing together.
Right.
Yeah.
In that way.
I mean, would they read stuff?
Oh,
to
yeah,
each other?
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
They were like their own little, writers
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
Work.
You had to be able to take some harsh feedback.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was,
Yeah.
I think it was George who used to say that, one time they went out and they all went out to the beach. They were all zipping off somewhere in the middle of the night or whatever. And they were out at the beach and he got some very harsh criticism about, where he was going with this, or whatever it was. And it became a habit. So he said it actually was a phrase he used, we're going to take him out to the beach. All for it, and then for it now. But again, always friends, always, well-meaning, always, friendly as to either competition or constructive criticism, never, aggravating.
Was Matheson the most successful of them?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure how we define successful.
Well,
but
I mean,
I would say Bradbury probably.
Well, obviously.
It's a tough call.
But I mean, Matheson did seem to be he made a good living for his family.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's one of the main things you're looking for.
Yeah, certainly in terms of the screenwriting, he was one of the most prolific.
And he kept it wasn't like he was just big in the Twilight Zone.
No.
Then he kept reinventing himself with the Corman movies and with the Dan Curtis movies and the other movies. Then later in life, when he wasn't, adapting stuff, they made, movies of his stuff. I mean, Stir of Echoes and did he like that movie, by the way?
He loved it, and I'm delighted to say that he did, because so often he would be disappointed with movies made from his books that he was not involved with, some of them that he was involved.
Yeah. And they changed a lot of the books.
Well,
but
that's the thing.
Yeah.
But he put I agree completely with his assessment of it, because he said, they changed a lot of the sort of superficialities or whatever they call it. He said, but they really kept the spirit of the book, which so often was not the case.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way. I said, I'm so gratified to hear him say that, because it was, I think he really did, keep the spirit of it. So that one, he was not very happy with What Dreams May Come.
No, that was a misguided effort, but it was an effort. It was trying to do something interesting.
And it may have been partly that, he, for many years, with originally Stephen Deutsch, then Stephen Simon, who produced Somewhere in Time, he tried to get his own version of What Dreams May Come made. He had a script, and they were working with Wolfgang Peterson, who did Das Boot. I have great adoration. And apparently they just couldn't, Peterson wanted them to make some kind of significant changes, and Stephen Deutsch Simon, said, we're not prepared to do that. So they pulled out of that. But finally, he realized that if he didn't get a screenwriter on board that had sufficient clout in Hollywood, it was never going to get made. So he ended up with Ron Bass, who I think did Rain Man, right, among other things. Yeah. And that was what finally got, but they didn't use Richard's script, which was finally published. So I think, I hate to say it's okay, but I'm sure he was a little disappointed in other things that they didn't do his version.
Yeah. So, I mean, Somewhere in Time was, his adaptation of his book, and it was very successful.
I mean, not only is that a wonderful movie, all about which you can hear tomorrow as well, but I think it's a tough call, but I think it may be one of the purest translations of Matheson onto the screen, and not just because he wrote the script. Sometimes he'd write the script and then he'd say, "Oh my God, I did the script." Right. But I think in that case, because he was on such good terms with the producer, that for one thing, that they really just, they got it.
Yeah.
So, and it's rare.
And the actors wanted to do it. I mean, they wanted to do that story. To tell it. Well, are there any questions?
Well, he did an adaptation of The Devil Rides Out. The history of that, which is a favorite of mine.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
What's
the history about him getting a hammer?
Oh, well,
He did a couple of Hammer.
Well, interestingly, he was first hired by Hammer to adapt My Legend.
Yeah.
And he went over to London on some famous cruise ship in English Escape Suite. He stayed at the Green Park Hotel and wrote the script, and everybody thought it was great. Hammer already had been having trouble with the censor at that point because the sort of blood and gore in their films, while today it's mild, was very controversial at that point. So they had to submit everything to the censor beforehand. So they gave the censor the script for what was going to be called Night Creatures, and they were like, no. You can't even, don't even bother making this because we're going to not let you release it. So Hammer went to Robert Lippert, who had distributed some of their films in the States, and they sold it to Lippert, who then, that's complicated, but they had it, first Richard himself rewrote it for that version, and made it closer to the book than the script he'd done for Hammer, which has also been published, although the intermediate one has not. But then Lippert had some chap named William Lester, who was not particularly famous, and we know why, rewrite it, and as a result, Matheson was not that happy with The Last Man on Earth, which eventuated, so he had his pseudonym of
Logan
Swanson, thank you, put on a screenwriter. It still says based on another way Richard Matheson, but then it says screenwriter Logan Swanson. Anyway, so he had a relationship with Hammer already, and by the time The Devil Rides Out was made, he had also written for them a movie called Domestically, in England. Fanatic in England. The funny thing is,
I know, but I love the title.
We'll get to that. The name of the movie in England was Fanatic. The funny thing is, the book that it was based on had the very generic title of Nightmare, but Hammer had already done a movie called Nightmare, so they, well, we're not going to use that. That would confuse everybody, so they call it Fanatic. And that is unsurprising because it was part of a whole series of like post-psycho thrillers that had names like Paranoia and Hysteria and Fanatic.
One word title.
Right, but here they said, I don't want to be Fanatic, because she's a religious fanatic. And so they called it Die, Die, My Darling, which, whether you like the title or not, has the legitimacy of being an actual line of dialogue from the film. So he did that for the picture, they were happy with that. So then they asked him to do The Devil Rides Out, which starred Christopher Lee, who was not only a big fan of the work of Dennis Wheatley, whose novel it was based on, but knew Wheatley, and it was supposed to start it was supposed to start a whole series of Wheatley adaptations, and it didn't. Well, yeah, because it's an extraordinary film, but it didn't do. I don't think it was a flop, but it didn't do very well. And then they also made The Lost Continent, which was based on Wheatley's book Uncharted Seas, which I haven't seen for a long time, because I remember it was pretty bad. So they said, forget it with the Wheatley. And only later on did they do To the Devil and Daughter, which I think was either their last feature or their last genre film, which also was related. But Matheson said that he got a letter from Dennis Wheatley, who wrote the book, and Wheatley said he was very impressed with how Matheson had streamlined it to make the screenplay. Because if you read the book, which is a fine book, but there are endless discursions on, palmistry and Stonehenge and, stuff that, so he streamed all that out and just kind of said, moving on, which he certainly does. It's a very fast-paced film, and Wheatley himself was greatly pleased with it. So, I mean, a lot of us, like yourself, to me, that is one of the best things Matheson ever put his hand to. So I'm disappointed that it didn't do better at the time, but that's how he ended up doing that and what happened. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's my specialty.
Any other questions?
Anybody?
So you brought up The Last Man on Earth.
Yeah.
And you think of the Omega Man with Charles Manson. What did he think of that one? Because I felt like it was so different from Last Man on Earth.
He obviously didn't like it very much. I don't remember, at least in my experience, him saying a lot of specifically negative things about it per se, but tellingly he would just say, yeah, well, they gave me a very small remake fee, but he said it was nothing like my book, so I really can't comment on it. So to me that said a lot, but I don't remember him like enumerating, objections to it or whatever.
I've always felt that The Last Man on Earth is a very underrated movie.
I'm with you 100%.
Very good. I've seen also a later print of it I've seen with it. It has the original ending and all that. And Vincent Price, although he's he's obviously terrible casting for the part, does a really good job with it. He plays it really well.
Yeah.
And it's really a haunting movie.
It's funny because Richard said that, you know, as much as he liked Vincent Price as a man, which he did considerably, and loved the work that he did in the Edgar Allan Poe films he wrote, he felt Vincent Price was completely miscast for that part. But I'm like you, I love it. I'm not going to say it's a flawless film. It has some parts that's very cheap looking, but in retrospect, having looked at the subsequent versions, you know, it's far closer to the book than any of those. And I say, you know, to me, it's so ironic that I'll take my name off of that. And I'm like, man, you look, if he'd known what lay ahead, he probably would say, yeah, please, put my name on there.
I've always felt that it was like the book, which is, you know, it's a short book, and it's basically all you have to do is film the book.
Right.
Why don't they do that? And then I wonder if Will Smith was just.
Well, I always pick out, you know.
I mean, that made me long for Anthony Zerbe to come in.
Oh, right.
And by the way, the other thing about the Omega Man is that nowadays it actually is kind of prescient, because when Anthony Zerbe is talking about it, banning science is bad. And it's like, Jesus Christ, he would be, you know, a member of the cabinet now.
By the way, if anybody wants a couple of other stats or whatever you want to call them, Robert Bloch also co-adapted his short story Girl of My Dreams for a not very well-known TV series called Journey to the Unknown, which was a co-production between Hammer and Columbia. And then he novelized the Twilight Zone movie that was largely scripted by Richard. So that was kind of an interesting, you know, thing. And of course, Matheson adapted The Martian Chronicles, Ray Bradbury's book, for the miniseries. And
Both of them were unhappy with that.
well, again, I qualify these things. I don't think Ray had any objections to Richard's script, which I thought was very well done. Their main
They
objection
objected to interference at the studio.
yeah, and most of all, they objected to the direction, which by Michael Anderson Sr., which they thought was just slow and boring. I mean, they have a point, but I think again, underrated. I don't know if I would call it underrated, but I think it has some points that, you know, should not be dismissed out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's this wonderful scene in there.
He didn't attribute it to Logan Swanson at any rate.
No, that's true. That's true. It's funny because there's a sequence in there which is mostly from a story.
Let me
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me tell you, we have 3 minutes left,
Uh-oh.
so just so you're aware of what our time
Oh,
is.
dear. All right. Well, anyway, there was a sequence in there where there's this shape-shifting Martian who basically appears as whatever you want him to be. And so at one point he meets up with this priest, some kind of religious father, whatever he was a Prince Weaver, and so he longed for years to see Christ, and so the guy manifests himself as Christ, who's played by John Finch, with the crown of thorns and the whole thing. And he passes on, Lord, here you are. And unfortunately for the Martian, it's terrible. It's excruciating. If he stays too long in this, whatever guise he's adopted, he can't get out of it. So he's like, please stop. Don't be so needy. I want to get out of here and go home and have lunch or whatever. And so he'd feel terrible. Richard said he thought that was the best scene in the whole miniseries. So that's anyway. I'm done. I'm sorry, or unless there's more.
Is there another question?
Anyway.
One more time for one more question.
Yes.
Are the rumors true that at some point L. Ron Hubbard tried to join the California Sorcery and was turned away?
I hope
Not
so.
that I know of.
Well, he belonged to the other organization of science fiction, right? It's
Yeah.
the one that left its cafeteria.
Yeah,
Right?
the
one before,
the
the
Los
kind of the generation
Angeles
before,
Science Fiction Society or
kind of
something.
the generation before.
Yeah.
That one.
Go ahead.
Do you know? I don't know. I don't.
I was going to say, I have some letters from my father where he talks a bit about L. Ron Hubbard, and I'll just say that he was not. I hope I haven't offended any know what happened.
We'll know why. Well.
Yes?
Yes.
Just an FYI, Logan was my great-grandmother,
Yes.
Emma Logan, and Swanson, I think, was a derivative of Svenington. Or
Yep.
that, from
I,
my-
you know, there were a lot of the Logan Swanson scripts were really quite good. Wasn't the pilot for Combat written by Logan Swanson?
Funny you should say that. Not the pilot, the first episode
The first
shown,
episode.
which is not always,
Okay, yeah.
was called Forgotten Front. And again, he wrote a script that was rewritten by somebody else. And the producer claimed, oh, we didn't change it at all. And so we put Logan Swanson on. The funny thing is, thank you for clarifying where the name came from, that he misremembered in later years when he first started using the pseudonym. One time I remember he said, oh yeah, I came up with that when we did Combat and I wanted my name taken off it. I think another time he may have said that he came up with it for The Last Man on Earth. But neither of those things is true, and my friend Paul here will help back me up on this. It was first used on a short story in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine.
Yeah.
Because the convention at the time was that if you had multiple stories in the same issue,
You
one
had-
of them would be under a pseudonym because they didn't want it to look like, this guy's
Yeah.
on everything.
This guy's-
So he had one Matheson story and one Logan Swanson story, and that was in 1957.
And what was the story, you know?
Well, I actually got that here. If you want me to show you. The
Make
two
It
stories.
Look Good was the one. that
56,
Logan Swanson and Children of Noah.
Yeah, that's, and then the one, the Matheson one in the same issue was The Children of Noah.
Oh, Children of Noah, that's a good
Yeah.
one. That's a good one.
So that's where Logan Swanson really, to the best of my knowledge, started. But
Yeah.
yeah, he used it on the Twilight Zone 80s version of Button, which was remade as Real Steel.
Yeah.
Again, and
No,
he wrote-
that was remade as.
the box, I'm sorry, the box,
The box.
exactly right. But, and he didn't like what Peter Medak, the director, did with that.
It's interesting though that it first appeared not because he didn't like the work, but because of the convention.
Yes, that's right, that's exactly, it only became his, what's Harlan Ellison's,
Cordwainer Smith.
Cordwainer Bird, right.
Button is an interesting one because you know the ending that they used in the Twilight Zone version was kind of legitimate. I mean that kind of worked too. They both endings work, but I didn't hate the ending.
No, I don't disagree. There's actually the origins of that thing are a little murky. First, I just knew it as a story he published in Playboy, and then he did the Twilight Zone thing. And then somewhere along the line, I was led to believe that he originally came up with it for the original Twilight Zone, and then either wrote a script and they didn't use it or something, and then he turned that into the short story and re-engineered the story
I think that-
back into a teleplay
Yeah.
for the later Twilight Zone. Now there's been 4 versions. So, but I can't completely back.
And the box is kind of actually crazy.
Good way to describe it.
But, is our time up?
Other questions?
Well, you did write a movie of the week, which, or the morning after. It's about
Yes.
alcoholism.
Well, the great thing, I'm glad you brought that up, because what I was gonna say, the great thing about that is that it's a classic Richard Matheson story about an ordinary guy who gets taken over by something and his life is changed and ruined. But instead of it being a fantastic supernatural element, it's a real thing that happened.
Although he was adapting a novel, it's not,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it fit his style so much. And it was so, Big Van Dyke was so good in it.
Apparently, when that was first made, Dick Van Dyke's own alcoholism had not yet been revealed. And so I remember, I don't remember where, so there's some quote where he said apparently when he looked at the script, he said, my God, he said, it's like somebody was looking in my window.
Yeah.
It was so completely consistent with his own life that most people didn't know about. And it's a tragedy, in my opinion, that as far as I know, that movie has never had any kind of commercial, like home video release. It's very hard to do.
Yeah.
I have it, the only reason I have a copy of it is because Richard sent me one. He had like a 16 millimeter print or something, and first time to dupe it for me. But
And
he
you'll
said,
be sending one to me next week, I trust.
I can remember it, though, I can remember moments of it, just word for word. I mean,
Oh, yeah,
just,
yeah.
it made such an impression on me.
and he was so proud of the fact, he said that in later years, medical schools would use it as like a tool, a teaching tool for alcoholism, because it was that, real. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Have there been any, by the way, have there been any alcoholism in the group? Were there any heavy drinkers in the group, or did they just smoke pot?
The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that I know at the end of his life, when he was starting to get to, Beaumont was a heavy drinker, I think because he was trying to kind of blot it out. But I don't think he was, congenitally, actually, I would think, better than us. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
We just figured we'd be talking.
More of these sessions tomorrow and Sunday.
Yes,
I
yes.
look forward to seeing you. Short stories at 10 tomorrow.
Oh, are you doing the Hell House tomorrow?
Sorry?
Are you doing the Hell House tomorrow?
The 4 o'clock thing, the Legends event, yes, he's on.
Legends, yeah.
The Hell House one, yeah.
Legend, I am Legend and Hell House, both of them, right? I think, yeah.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
Yeah, well, I do an insight.
Oh.
I didn't talk about the word time.
Oh. They don't, because they conflict? Yeah. They don't conflict, they move them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
His panel was originally assigned, he was supposed to be in 2 places at once, talking about Somewhere in Time with us, and doing this other
I
thing.
was gonna move him into my.
I think if you could do
No,
that, everybody likes
They moved his, they moved the other one back to 4 o'clock.
I got somebody who wants to go.
Yeah, if you use the app or if you print it out on the schedule online, it has the correct time, but the one in the little handout is wrong.
I
This one is wrong.
know. It's only
This is
you.
wrong. So check I guess the best thing is check the signs in front of the doors.
Good job, gentlemen.
Thank you.
It's just amazing.
I loved
what
it.
you know.
I loved it. It was really wonderful.
Yeah. I'm
It's
just
good to have you here, really.
blown away by how smart you guys are about things,
I was, I hope that if I said something egregiously wrong, you would have corrected me.
No, you know all these things that I only saw from a certain perspective. He was not someone that discussed all of the vicissitudes of his work, but yeah.
But we certainly were curious whether, you remembered a lot of like group members hanging out
Oh, yeah.
around the house, or, had any
Yeah, absolutely.
great anecdotes about that.
When they weren't hanging, they were calling.
That was going to be my question for you. You talked in your session a bit about some of the actors that you like and didn't like. And are there authors that you encountered that you like better than others, or some that were real kind of not going to answer that one?
I mean, I grew up with old Charlton pictures all over the
Yeah.
wall.
Didn't you guys take them in at some
We did.
point after the parents?
That's
My
quite a
dad was
story.
just done. They were both looked like they were just done like that.
Yeah.
It was unheard of.
Right.
What he was.
Right. And
And
I
still
know they were close.
unheard of.
I know your dad and Charles were really close.
Yes, it was very devastating for them, and we ended up taking on all my kids in a lot of ways. And I'd say Bill.
I've met Beaumont's son, Chris Beaumont.
Chris Beaumont.
And-
He's lovely.
I know. I see you.
And he's going, I know, he's going to the Sterling events.
Oh, later this month?
Yeah, my brother, I don't know
The one in,
Binghamton.
Binghamton? Oh, yeah. I'm going to that.
Yeah.
Well, say hi to your brother from him.
Yeah, I'm gonna let him know how things are going.
Yeah.
You could make it before you see him.
Yeah, we were sat there.
I was telling you guys it is.
Also, you're wrong about one thing.
What?
yeah.
I want to know.
Oh, I
know.
got
Oh, damn, they turned the tape off.
Not literally, but spiritually. He wasn't above writing all of his work. He did write John 3D to help put her through college.
Wait, I'm sorry, what was the first part of what you
He
said?
said that he might have been above writing.
Oh, no, I didn't mean, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I meant he might have been above writing for William Castle. Oh, no, Chaucer. But, you know, I don't know how much of the background you know, but he claimed, well, I won't say claimed, he told me that what they filmed was very different from what he wrote. That's so often the case. He said he wrote, you know, he came up with this idea that the baby shark would be in the filtration system of this sea world or whatever, and that because it pumped the water went across its gills and it didn't have to move. Otherwise, if they don't move, they die because there's no water going to the gills. But the filtration system provided the water to the gills. And he said, never in his wildest dreams did he envision that they would make the two main characters the sons of Sheriff Brody, which was not in the script. He said, it's like these sharks have been to Oxford or something. They know exactly where you are. They have this terrible, vengeful personality. And meanwhile, the other sharks were all blown up anyway.
Yeah.
So what are you, the grandson and great-grandson or whatever? You know, he was, you know, so, and he said to me that Carl Gottlieb, who wrote or worked on the scripts for both of the two prior films, came in and, you know, mucked up his version, and that's how it ended up. He said at one point, for some reason, they wanted to have Mickey Rooney be in the movie.
Why not?
Well, you could eat
Why
it.
not?
Okay.
So he had to redo the script and do this whole new thing where and he was supposed to be like some old, you know, guy who used to run a Marine World type thing or something. I don't know, he was his father or one of the characters. And so he did wrote all that thing, and then he said, nah, I'm not going to do it. So then it came all out again. But that sort of stuff happened all the time. So anyway, it's not it's a terrible movie, but it ain't his fault. And, you know,
Yeah.
I'm sure at the time he was like, oh, well,
Maybe
okay.
it helped me to college.
Right,
I was going to say, I guess we might talk about it in the other session tomorrow, is how much your dad wrote for film and movie and television financially.
Oh, yeah.
Preferred to work on novels and stories, and it might be interesting to think
You mean
about what.
subsidize the family?
Yeah, no, that's, and he said that often.
But it'd be interesting to think about what his legacy is if he had finished some of those
You
novels.
thought I could have a basic green life and have fixed my life, and then my jail 3D, oh my God.
He had an amazing career.
I don't think he has any regrets.
Oh, yeah.
And,
It would be interesting.
and, you know, I mean, somewhere in Big Time Return, I mean, he couldn't have thought that that was a book that would particularly be in his wheelhouse, that would sell anything, and the fact that it was such a success, and the movie was such a success. is
Well, but
pretty
not
impressive.
initially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it didn't do that well.
Who's the moderator for that tomorrow, by the way?
For the Summer in Time?
Yeah. Is that right?
Am I the moderator for that one? All
You are
right.
now.
Are you going to share about how you're going to attend? Because, you know, I'll sure mention that to Joe.
I'm gonna, huh?
You're going to say, I'll say to Joe, look at that video. Look, Joe, we got a new attendee coming up.
You're
Well,
gonna.
she's aware of this. Yeah.
That woman on
You're
my
just
board.
gonna connect her on your computer, right? While you're in.